Good morning, class. As you came in today, you should have received this note sheet, and this lesson that we're going to be talking about today is ordering real numbers, and this will go into your composition notebook. So just follow along. Last week we studied real numbers, which include rational numbers, irrational numbers, integers, whole numbers, and natural numbers. And hopefully you remember what each of those mean. If you don't, you can always go back and look at your notes from last week, because this week we're going to be talking about taking these different real numbers and putting them in order, either from least to greatest or greatest to least. And so when we look at real numbers, there are a lot of different forms they can take. Let's look at this example. It says order 5/8, 62%, the square root of 2, 1 1/6, and 0.87 from least to greatest. So with these numbers, we can obviously see that they're not all immediately in the same form. So obviously we have a fraction here, a percent, a square root, a mixed number, and a decimal. So if we want to order them, we have to figure out a way to be able to compare them accurately. If we just look at these and maybe try to estimate and say, well, 5/8 is a little more than a half, and 62% is a little more than a half, but I don't know what the square root of 2 is, 1 1/6 is a little more than 1, 0.87 is a little less than 1, we don't really know, and there's no way to be accurate if we're just looking at it. So we have to make all of these numbers into the same form that is easily comparable. To do so, we are going to be converting every number to a decimal. So up here, I want you to write convert to decimal. And the reason why is because every number, no matter what form it is in, can be pretty easily converted to a decimal. And when you look at different decimals, it's really easy to tell which ones are bigger and which ones are smaller. So today I'll be teaching you how to do these by hand or in your head, because sometimes it's just quicker to do that in easy, simple problems. And then I'll also be showing you how to do it on the calculator, which is a little bit more complex in certain areas, but will also help you a lot. I know we haven't taught y'all a lot on the Inspire yet, so hold tight and we will get to it. So for the first number, here we have 5/8, which is obviously a fraction. So how do you convert a fraction to a decimal? Hopefully you remember that when you have a fraction, this bar right here means to divide. So to say 5/8 is the same thing to say 5 divided by 8. So if you want to find what 5/8 is as a decimal, you're going to simply divide. 5 divided by 8. So obviously we know that 8 cannot go into 5, so we have to add a decimal, and then we can start from there. So we can subtract 4.8, which is multiplied by 0.6, bring down the 2 and add a 0, subtract 16, and you have a 2 here, you have 4, add a 0, bring down the 0, and then subtract 40, and you're left with 0. So your number is 0.625. Okay, hopefully everyone remembers how to divide, and you get 0.625, so that's nice. It's a decimal with 3 digits behind the decimal. On the calculator, a lot of you have already run into this problem, but when you type in 5 divided by 8 and you hit enter, it gives you 5/8. So 5/8 is obviously equal to 5/8, but that doesn't help us with anything. So in order to get it in decimal form, when you do 5 divided by 8, click Control, this yellow button right here, and you'll notice that there are a lot of letters that are in yellow, a lot of signs that are in yellow. And so if you want to reach these, you hit Control, and then you hit any one of these yellow buttons in order to get to it. So if I just clicked enter, it would enter, but if I hit Control, you'll see these 2 squiggly lines here, and that means approximately equal to. So you'll hit Control, enter, and there you go. There's your decimal. So 5/8 is equal to 0.625. So write down these steps just in case you forget. You're going to type in 5 divided by 8. You're going to hit Control, and then enter. And you get exactly the same answer as when you did it by hand. So a lot of times it's great to check by your calculator or even check your calculator by hand because sometimes you plug things in wrong. Great, so then next we're going to look at a mixed number, which you know is a whole number with a fraction. So here we have 1 and 1/6. 1 and 1/6. And so just like with the fraction, remember that this part means divide, but also remember that the whole number is in front of a decimal. You always put the whole number in front of a decimal. So you already know that your answer is 1 point something, right? And so with the 1/6, you can just divide again. And I'm going to do it at the side because there's not a lot of space. But you put the 1 on the inside and you divide it by 6. So same with earlier, we're going, obviously if it's a decimal, we know that 6 doesn't go into 1. So we can do 0.1, bring the 4 down, carry the 0 down, subtract 36, 0.6, you can go to 4, go to 0, bring it down, subtract 36. So you can see that every time you subtract 36 from 40, you're going to get 4, so it's going to continue. So here you have a repeating decimal. So remember that you already carried the whole number over in front of the decimal. So you have 1 point, and then here's your decimal. 1, 6, 6, 6, repeating. Alright, so by calculators, you can't really type the mixed number in. So this is where it's really important to remember that the whole number goes in front of the decimal. So whole number in front of your decimal. Okay? So always remember that. Before you divide the fraction part, put your whole number. You already know what your whole number is going to be. Okay, so here you know that your whole number is going to be 1, right? Then you're going to do 1 divided by 6. And same trick as before. Control, enter. And you get the same answer. Remember that if there's a 7 at the end, that doesn't mean the decimal actually stops at 7. That means they simply rounded. So you get control plus enter, and then you get 0.16 repeating. Combine your whole number and your decimal, you get 1.16 repeating. Same as with by hand. Great. So now let's look at a percent to a decimal. So if you have 62% in this example, remember that percent means out of 100. So when you are looking at this number, you know that 62% is the same thing as 62 out of 100. Now you could do the long way and divide 62 by 100 because remember that this means divide. But because you're always dividing by 100, there's a shortcut you can take that is called a place value shift. PVS for short. PVS. It's when you take a number and you shift the place value. So that often happens, you might have heard it as called moving the decimal. But really what you're doing is you're shifting the value of the number by moving the decimal. So when you have 62 over 100 or 62%, what you do is you take the number, and you know that the decimal usually the decimal is always behind the number, right? If it's a whole number. And to do your place value shift, dividing by 100 is the same thing as shifting your value to that 2 places to the left because you're dividing. So 2 places to the left, you bring it 1 here, 2 here. So your decimal is 0.62. So every time you have a percent, no matter what kind of a percent it is, if you have 1%, for example, do it over here, 1%, you have 1 with your decimal behind it, you can do a place value shift because remember, you're always dividing by 100. So you move the decimal 2 places over to the left. Your decimal's right here. Since there's a blank space, add a 0. So 1% is equal to 0.01 as a decimal. So remember, when you're doing percent to decimal, just do a simple place value shift. Move the decimal from the back to 2 places to your left. Make sure it's to your left, not to your right. If you move it to the opposite way, you're going to get a huge number. That doesn't make sense. So by calculator, there's no shortcut to this because it's already so easy. You're literally just moving the decimal by doing a place value shift. And on this calculator, there isn't really a percent function that would help you. So we're not going to do that. For square root to decimal, you're not going to do this by hand. Just like you did square roots and squares last week, it's really just much easier to use a calculator. So use the resources given to you. So I'm going to show you where the square root function is. If you can find the radical sign, it's right here. So it's the x squared button, but you have to click control first to get to the yellow spot. So you click control x squared and then type in your number. So on here we had square root of 2. Type in your number, and if you hit enter, bam, there's your number. So remember, to get to the radical, you type in control plus x squared, and then you type in your number. So type your number in, whatever you're taking the square root of, and then you hit enter. So the square root of 2 is equal to 1.41421. Great. So for the rest of the numbers here, obviously 0.87 is already in a decimal, so we don't need to convert it. So on the bottom here, we have a number line without any numbers on it. So we're going to put those in really quick. Obviously, we don't have any numbers lower than 0, so we can just start with 0 on this left-hand side. The highest number isn't bigger than 2, so we can do 2 on the right-hand side and put a 1 in the middle. So, with this number line, order them from least to greatest. You can look at each of these numbers and see how they compare on this number line. So for the first one, 5/8 is 0.625. So that's going to be between 0 and 1, a little closer to the 1. We'll put it right here. So that's 5/8. Alright, we have 62%, which we said is 0.62. 0.62 is a little bit less than 0.625, so it would go right there, 62%. And then we're looking at the square root of 2, which is equal to 1.41, so it's in between 1 and 2, a little bit closer to the 1, square root of 2. And then we have 1 1/6, which is 1.1 with the 6 repeating. And so we know that that is a little bit closer to the 1 than the square root of 2 is. So we put 1 1/6. And you're estimating here, so just make sure that it makes sense in relation to the other numbers. And then 0.87. 0.87 is obviously bigger than 0.625, but less than 1, so it could go right there. So a lot of times on practice problems or on your quizzes or whatever, it might ask you to place the numbers on a number line, but it may also ask you to just list them. So if you were to list them from least to greatest, you have 62%, 5/8, 0.87, 1 1/6, and the square root of 2. Pretty simple. All you have to do, convert to decimal. If you forget, look at these handy dandy notes you have.